The New York Giants. They do the chalk thing at 3, which I think was good process. They take Abdul Carter at number 3 overall, and then make the big splash by trading back into the first round, which started to gain a lot of steam, both from the Jackson Dart hype with the Saints and everything with him, and also just the steam that somebody was going to trade back into the first for a quarterback. Started thinking it was going to be Dart leading up to the draft. Shedeur stuff still seemed likely at that time. But they take Abdul Carter at 3, and then Jackson Dart trading up to 25 to take their potential franchise quarterback.
Yeah, good process in the first round, like you said. Can't give them too much credit for taking Abdul Carter just because I think just about every team in the NFL would have taken that pick, but they did the right thing. They could have reached on quarterback. I mean, we've seen this happen before. They reached on Daniel Jones a few years ago in 2019. So teams have done it before. But Abdul Carter was absolutely the correct pick. I mean, he could end up being the best player in this entire draft class. That's definitely on the table for him. You also pair him with the rest of that defensive line, which is now looking absolutely terrifying. I mean, you have Brian Burns coming off the other edge. You have Dexter Lawrence in the interior as the best nose tackle in the NFL. And you also have Kayvon Thibodeaux, who is now your third edge rusher. And listen, Kayvon Thibodeaux as the number one guy, I don't love because he hasn't really panned out as a top 10 pick. But as your third edge rusher, now all of a sudden I love that. It's like that's insanely good depth. And who knows if they ended up like signing him long term. I don't think they will. But
Right.
as far as next season is concerned, I mean, this defensive line is now looking like one of the best in the league. And I don't know how many like position groups as of recent for the Giants have been arguably one of the best in the league. I mean, they just really haven't had that kind of roster, but you add a guy like Abdul Carter. And also, I'll jump ahead a little bit and talk about Darius Alexander in the third round. You
Yeah.
add Darius Alexander in the interior in the third round. Now, all of a sudden, this defensive line for the Giants is looking absolutely phenomenal, man.
Yeah, literally could. I mean, I don't think it's a stretch to even say it looks like the best defensive line in the NFL.
It's really not. It's not a
I
stretch at
mean,
all.
and easily, yeah, exactly, easily arguable because Darius Alexander is another guy that kind of dropped in terms of the value, was gaining a little bit of hype to go in the first by some people, but definitely a surprise to see him fall all the way from the second. So them grabbing him at the top of the third, pairing that with Abdul Carter, and to your point, you know, I envision he's going to end up being the number 2 to Brian Burns, and then letting Kayvon kind of be more situational. And he's also a little bit, decent run defender, just not great pass rush. So maybe you use Abdul to coming off the edge more in the passing situations to begin his career. You have more versatility to play with there, but a defensive line that just looks absolutely terrifying now. So love the pick of Carter, and then love that pick of Darius Alexander at the top of the third. And now we got to talk quarterback.
Yep.
Jackson Dart is the second quarterback off the board. I think most people probably before 8 hours before the draft, where the Dart hype really started to grow, still expected Shedeur to be the second one off the board. But things officially start his plummet. But they jump up to grab Ole Miss's quarterback, Jackson Dart, to potentially be their guy.
Listen, man, didn't love Dart as a prospect. I'll start off by saying that, but I love the process. The Giants are without a franchise quarterback. They signed 2 bridge quarterbacks in the offseason in Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston, which again, when you don't have a guy, I think signing a bridge guy is a good process. And we have to add the context, and Giants fans are fully aware of this. Their coach and their GM are currently fighting for their job. As far as hot seats are concerned, they are some of the hotter seats in the NFL. They are fighting for the job this season, and I don't know if it just means like guaranteed if they have a losing season they're out. But going forward, I think they've built a solid nucleus here. And as far as Jackson Dart's concerned, they give up 2 third-round picks, but listen, to trade back up to the first round. But you're going for a quarterback, so it kind of changes the math a little bit. Like, because if Jackson Dart even becomes a solid starting quarterback, then all of a sudden the 2 third-round picks are completely pointless, man. It doesn't matter at all. Now, if he becomes and I don't even know if this is in his range of outcomes, but it's possible. Maybe it's like a 1% chance. But if he becomes an elite quarterback, then it's like, dude, then you just hit the the steal of the draft. I mean, it could literally be the steal of the draft. But this isn't like, that's not his projection, obviously. I mean, like you just mentioned, Dakota, many people still expected Shedeur Sanders to be the second quarterback off the board. And that is an interesting story, right? Because it seemed like the Giants were on Shedeur. Like they seemed like they were interested in Shedeur all the way through the process until
Yep.
the interviews happened. And apparently the report is that Daboll gave him like homework, Shedeur Sanders homework, and Shedeur Sanders didn't do the homework, and Daboll was pissed about that, and Shedeur was pissed that Daboll was pissed about it. And that's all she wrote, man. And listen, I'm on the Giants side in that, man. I am, because like when you're a guy like Shedeur Sanders who isn't the cleanest prospect in the world, you need to do your homework. Like you need to do what they assign you. So I get why they ended up going with Jackson Dart instead. Just from because listen, like that those intangibles matter to a certain extent, dude. They really do. Especially when we're talking about the most important position. It's the quarterback position, man. I talk about this a lot on this show and will continue to. It's looked at differently, man, as far as leadership and things like that are concerned. So they probably liked a little bit more of those intangibles in Dart. And he was productive in college, man. It's just a question of
Yep.
that Ole Miss offense. How will that Ole Miss offense translate to the NFL?
Yeah, you really nailed it on the head there. And we've talked about a lot where the parts that we don't see play almost an even bigger role with those interviews. And the details kind of trickle out afterwards. And I mean, it's such a believable thing because of the fact that Shedeur fell as far as he did, that it sounds like he just rubbed a lot of teams the wrong way. And I completely respect, I think we can both think that fifth round value for him after that is solid, but also completely understand the Giants not wanting to draft him after that. Like, I wouldn't be a fan of the guy either. So they go with Dart instead. And I also agree, giving up 2/3 to move back into the first. I love that. The value of having a quarterback on a rookie deal in the first round is also incredibly valuable because you get the 5th-year option. You get an extra year essentially of being able to have them. And there's just more flexibility there. That's what the Ravens did when they traded back just to pick 32 to get Lamar, in 2018. So I love that process there. And they went and got the guy they wanted. And Dart is an interesting prospect because your point, like we share this as Tennessee fans, as Vols fans. Our offense is probably the worst to project to the NFL, and then Ole Miss's is probably the one after that. It's a little bit more complex than Tennessee's, at least from like a matching to the NFL perspective. But it's still pretty tough to project. So you have to take that in line with also not necessarily elite tape, where he didn't necessarily show anything super elite. One thing that I think I would give him credit for is that he's a pretty quick decision maker. Like that's one thing that can, with honestly comparing what Shedeur does, where he does the like ball pat thing and stuff. Like I think that's sometimes a sense of like hesitancy. And Dart doesn't really have that. Like when he sees, he usually just lets it rip. Now, whether it's accurate or whatnot, different question. But like he at least has that processing time where when he sees it develop, he gets it out. So that's something you like. Where you could also probably argue that Daniel Jones wasn't necessarily the best at that. So to go in a different direction there probably feels pretty good. But yeah, an interesting guy. He's got athleticism. He can scramble a bit. He's not the best at truly like evading in the pocket. He can get himself into trouble sometimes. But he's good, if he can get out and escape, he can pick up some yards on the ground, which is pretty standard for today's quarterbacks. Not quite the athlete. Daniel Jones gets a lot of rep, but like he is honestly a fantastic athlete. So not that level, but yeah, I mean, he's inconsistent on tape, but like it's again, you project it, you don't know what he'll be because of the Ole Miss thing as well. So, but all that to say, especially hearing how many other teams were so high on him, I think the value of giving up 2/3 to get that extra year, potentially 2 on the contract, and seeing what he is, I think it's worth it. Where you're in a position where you need a quarterback.
Totally agree, dude. And another interesting kind of X factor in all of this is Brian Daboll was a massive part of Josh Allen's development. Now, not comparing Josh Allen to Jackson Dart in any way, shape, or form, because they're completely different players coming out, like polar opposite players, to be completely honest with you. However, Brian Daboll really hasn't gotten the opportunity to develop a rookie quarterback since he's been the head coach of the Giants. It's really
True.
been Daniel Jones, and they inherited Daniel Jones. Now, their mistake was signing him to the deal. They were a part of that. That was a huge mistake. But that is going to be interesting, dude, because Brian Daboll has kind of, it seems like despite the Giants being terrible, he's done a lot with a little. I would say, or he's made good work with what he's been given as a
Yeah,
Giants
yeah.
head coach, and as an offensive guru. So we'll kind of see how that works out. Unfortunately, they're in such a tough spot, man, which is kind of part of this that kind of goes under the radar. They might not even get to see the fruits of their labor with Jackson Dart because, like, if they just aren't in a position to win next year, which I don't think they will be with Russell Wilson at quarterback, I just don't think that, and I think that's fair to say. Like, Russell Wilson is just not, that caliber quarterback anymore. So, if they never, like, if they lose, 12 games next year and they get fired, Jackson Dart could still end up being good down the line, man, but they'll never know because it's just like they're at the end of the line here. They kind of need to get out of this this slump like this year, or else they're going to be gone. So that's an interesting part of this as well.
And this comes back to, and I won't spend too much time on it, but like the conversations that started around quarterback evaluation and everything, and now the NFL doesn't know what they're doing and blah blah blah. But like people don't talk about the fact that what you just pointed out, Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll's jobs are on the line. You are coaching and you are GMing for your job. And sometimes that means you have to do things that are a bit rash to others, to the outside people. You have to take those chances because you are quite literally trying to save your job in some aspects. And a lot of owners they're not comfortable with, like what we always talk about. We have this idea of like, well, let us just truly tank or let us figure this out for 2 seasons. They don't want that. They need to sell tickets. They need to sell jerseys. So if you're sucking, they're not going to be happy. And so that results in situations where a guy may feel like he gets overdrafted. And a lot of the times it's still what the consensus had, like everybody's top prospects, this consensus was that order, like Mitch in 2017. Mitch was the number 1 quarterback on every single person's board for the most part.
But so many people rewrite that.
Exactly. But you do that, what the consensus and what everybody was doing at the time. And then in this situation, Shedeur aspect adds a new element to this where the guy may have technically been a better quarterback prospect, but you're also drafting the person. You have to have a guy that you want in your locker room. And so they are now hitching their cart, and maybe they try to ride out, the Russell and Jameis train as long as they can. Because Jameis is good for at least the first game he comes in, he's going to ball out. That's what he does.
He's going to ball out, exactly.
Russell, complete wild card now, though. You have no idea what you're going to get from him. But they are now hitched to that. And again, to your point, like their jobs are on the line, and now Jackson Dart will probably be the thing that determines if they're here or not. And then to your point with Daboll, the next guy is now probably going to have Jackson Dart. That did not draft him if it doesn't work out this year and they get fired, even if Dart isn't the reason why.
Yeah, exactly, dude. And it also just speaks to the interesting nature of the quarterback position in football. It's such a unique sport and such a unique position because that's how valuable it is, man. Like teams do weird things for this position because it's so critical for your team's success. You can have the best roster in the NFL and have a bad quarterback and it's just not going to work. So that's why you see things like this. That's why giving up 2 third-round picks to jump up 10 spots or whatever it was, it's just not crazy because you're going for the most important position in football and in sports in general. So we'll see how it works out. I mean, it's gonna kind of depend on it's gonna be what decides their job or not, kind of like we're saying, because Russell Wilson and Jameis, I get it. Like it could work for a few games, but it's just don't be surprised at all when Jackson Dart comes in midway through this season because the Giants aren't going to win with Russell Wilson. I just think, I think that's pretty clear at this point. So we'll see how it works out, but good process.
Yeah, and their offensive line is still in a rough spot as well, so that's going to play a role in this. And as a Titans fan with Will Levis, he is what he is, the meme-ness, but also it's so hard to evaluate a guy who's thrown behind an offensive line that's trying to get him killed. That being said, Drake May still looked good behind one of those, but it's still really hard to truly evaluate your guy when the offensive line is not helping them out. So in the current state of it, too, it'd feel pretty rough to have to throw Dart behind that and let him try to figure it out. So we'll be fascinated to see what happens, but they do double up on bridge quarterback contracts as options so they can kind of pivot between the two if they need to, if they don't feel comfortable putting Dart out there. But yeah, again, I agree. Love that process. So we touched on their third. They get Darius Alexander. And then the fourth round, they get one of the favorites of the entire draft, Cam Skattebo,
Love it,
an
man.
absolute dog
Love
that
it, dude.
people want in their locker room. People thought, the Giants needed a new running back with, Saquon being gone. That's still sensitive. And honestly, Tyrone Tracy's looking like a fantastic late round pick for them. Cam Skattebo is a very different skill set than that. So you now can pair him together with him and have a pretty interesting backfield.
Yeah, man. And that Saquon discussion is an interesting one for the offseason. We might get into that a little bit there in the offseason. But, adding Skattebo to this offense, into this room, into this locker room, dude, I just love it, dude. I mean, Skattebo is going to be a contributor, man. I don't know if he's going to be an all-pro or a Pro Bowler or whatever, but he's going to make a contribution to this team some way or another. He's just one of the funnest players to watch last year in college football, dude. He was just so fun to watch, so electric in the championship game and also the playoffs, the college football playoffs. So yeah, man, just really fun to watch. And listen, like Tyrone Tracy has looked good. There's no doubt about that, but he's going to compete for reps. I think he's going to compete for reps right away. So love that pick in the fourth round.
Yeah, a fan favorite, character guy, locker room guy, absolute dog. Dude runs like he's a bowling ball out there. So love adding that to this offense. And they take a guy who fell pretty far with incredible value of getting Marcus Mbow, the tackle out of Purdue in the fifth round, who I think a lot of people expected to go on day 2. So adding him in the fifth, and then Thomas Fedone, the second tight end of Nebraska, who is just a kind of like an elite run blocking tight end. So adding 2 guys that kind of add pieces to that offensive line blocking situation up front, where he could come in and Marcus Mbow could immediately come in and be competing for that right tackle job.
I agree. Or interior. A lot of people project.
True, he could bump inside. Yeah.
I don't be surprised at all, Giants fans, if you got a starting offensive lineman. We'll just call him lineman because he could really play any of these positions in the fifth round. So I absolutely loved that value, man. I mean, he was like a projected third round player. So getting him in the fifth, listen, this Giants draft is phenomenal, dude. They got a bunch of contributors. That's why it's also kind of sad with this Joe Schoen and Daboll situation, because I feel like their last couple of drafts, man, they have just been really, really good. And so this might be a situation, if they do get fired, if they are a year away from rebuilding this team, this could be a really good situation to come into for the potential next regime.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, you're looking at a roster right now that has, I think, roughly 5 or so starters on it from last year's draft, including an elite wide receiver in Malik Neighbors, who looked phenomenal in his rookie season. The running, getting Tyrone Tracy, Theo Johnson at tight end, Tyler Nubin looked fantastic at safety. So yeah, to your point, now adding another class that looks really good on paper to this. I mean, if they don't survive this next season, the next regime is coming into a much better situation than I think both of them walked into.
No doubt.
Will be really interesting to see what happens for New York this season. They take Corey Black, corner out of Oklahoma State, in the seventh to wrap out their class. Good in zone coverage. He's kind of a zone guy. Another guy, add competition. I'm saying that to a corner room that is decent. They signed Paulson Adebo, the corner from New Orleans. That was out of Stanford from a few years back. And they also signed Javon Holland. So I got to mention that. They did get Holland to that big contract, was kind of the top safety prospect, still really young. So a very, very revamped secondary from a few years ago, when I know as a Titans fan, they had signed Adoree, and he was kind of leading the room for them. It looks a lot better now. So love that. Yeah.
But interesting thing about Corey Black, I didn't have much to say about him, but he's currently listed as their second string left outside cornerback. That's interesting. If he can end up actually making contribution as a 7th round pick, that's like I said, man. It just speaks to this draft, and they really nailed their picks, man. It was fantastic process. They drafted valuable positions. They didn't screw up number 3 overall. And I know that kind of like, again, I'll say I don't give him a ton of credit for that, but we've seen so many teams do it in the past. So overall, dude, these players, whether it's for this current regime or not, it's for this current GM and head coach or not, they are going to be great New York Giants down the line, dude, and will help rebuild this team at some point.
Absolutely. And they did have this whole division had at least one interesting UDFA signing from guys that we kind of expected to go a little bit higher. So they get Antoine Wells, which it kind of like what the Titans did, and we'll touch on that eventually, but you also get a UDFA that is your new rookie quarterback, guy he played with. But Juice Wells, as he's called, from Ole Miss, was at South Carolina and was phenomenal as a sophomore, and ends up transferring and kind of got stuck on the depth chart a bit, behind Trey Harris and Jordan Watkins. So a guy that this time last year or 2 years ago was looking like a much higher round pick goes undrafted, and they sign him along with like 6 other wide receivers. So they clearly want to add some competition to that room behind Malik Neighbors. But yeah, like what they did, and adding more wide receivers to that room is a smart move for the Giants. So with that in mind, what was your favorite pick for the G-Men?
Favorite pick for the G-Men. A lot of options on this one, I'll be honest. I mean, I could really pick any of these picks. I'm going to go their 5th rounder, though. Marcus Mebbo.
Okay.
He is going to make a contribution on this offensive line, dude. Great, just a great consensus value. And that's something that I just kind of I'm drawn towards, because the consensus board just kind of ends up being the best indicator of the draft class. And so getting him in the 5th round is fantastic, and you're going to plug a hole on that offensive line.
Love it. I would go Scatterboo, but I'm not going to go Scatterboo. Love him. I as a running back prospect, not as high, but still love him as a dude you want in your locker room. But I'm going to go Darius Alexander.
Love it.
I think the value of him at the top of the 3rd is fantastic, and they've kind of had a hole next to Dexter Lawrence on the interior for a minute. It was kind of Dexter and friends lately. So adding him there, who could compete for that starting job alongside Dexter Lawrence immediately, is fantastic value in the 3rd round. He can pass rush. He can do a little bit of everything. So help take the load off of Dexter, which will also make him play even better, and make that defensive line just absolutely disgusting for the Giants.
Exactly,
so,
dude. That is an intriguing part of this draft, dude. You may have just turned a solid defensive line into the best in the NFL in one draft class.
Literally, at the very minimum, an elite one.
Exactly.
So what does the consensus grade say for the Giants?
Number 2 overall draft class, right behind the Patriots. Don't disagree with this at all, man. Just looking back to the Giants draft before we got on and did this today, I'm like, wow, this is a really, really good draft class. They are headed in the right direction, man. Getting a draft back-to-back drafts, which, listen, part of this is just because you're bad and you're drafting high, but back-to-back drafts with Malik Neighbors and Abdul Carter, I mean, those are franchise-changing players, dude, at the outside of quarterback, at the 2 most valuable positions on the football field. They just have to hit the quarterback, and I'm not going to sell y'all Kool-Aid. Jackson Dart may or may not be that guy. We'll see down the line, but if they can get it right at QB, man, this roster is looking a lot better than it was a few years ago.
And you hit a really good point. One of the things that John Mara was worried about with the Saquon thing was losing that kind of franchise guy, the face of the franchise. And I think they've added 2. Because, regardless of Dart, but Malik Neighbors is that guy. He's wide receiver 1 written all over him. I want my wide receiver 1 to be a diva. I want Malik Neighbors saying all this stuff about he wants more catches. You want to see that from your wide receiver 1.
No doubt.
And then Abdul wanting Lawrence Taylor's number. The audacity of it's a bit interesting, but that tells you he's got that personality that you kind of want another LT like that coming off the edge. So they may just found their 2 guys that can be the face of their franchise. And I think that I love that for them as well. And then adding the other layer of Dart is really interesting. So definitely agree they had a fantastic class, and really fascinated to see what they do this year, with Russell probably starting and then seeing how things go from there. But that is the Giants 2025 class.